Hey guys, so today you and I are going to talk about growing pains. So let's get into it. So the question was, Frederick, what are some growing pains experienced by software engineering tech startups? So the first one is usually the growth of the actual development process. That's number one, where a small startup is usually built by a person or a few people, and usually in the start of things, the process is very ad hoc. You don't really have, it's either very complicated, you make a lot of mistakes when you have a early fresh sort of project. The reason being that you're sort of experimenting and you're sort of making a lot of decisions, and you're in many cases, if you're, it depends on the software developers as well, the mistakes are sometimes from the product perspective. You build the wrong thing because you're sort of trying to figure out what's going to work, what's going to make the next, the next thing happen. But there's also technical mistakes where you have people who sort of, they try out a lot of tools, they experiment a lot with different ways of doing things, and then there's like a reason for them to drop off on that thread, and all of a sudden you have some legacy and so forth. So you have a lot of that stuff going on. And the first thing that is usually very difficult is that you need to start hiring people to join that process, but you haven't really ever designed a hiring process or onboarding process or anything like that. So the first growing pain is usually to just staff up your company and still keep people to keep the balance of, okay, now I have more people joining. That's going to take time and it's going to cost money, and at the same time I have this code base, or I have this product which is sort of hacky or like so forth and so forth, and maintain quality without causing a lot of new bugs and regressions and so forth, which is notoriously difficult, especially when you're hiring people who are, depending on who you're hiring, it's usually very difficult to refine and to restructure the product so that more people can join without causing a lot of issues and having problems with delays or bugs or things like that. It can work, but I've always seen the same thing, which is, people sort of get into the small scale startup, it starts growing, and the code base is pretty ad hoc, it's very hacky, and the more people you add, the more experimentation kind of goes into it. And for a lot of people, it's difficult to join a project where you might not have unit tests, or you're using multiple solutions. You sort of have to learn all these weird ways of deploying code or so forth and so forth, and you realize that, hey, there's actually just one or two people who actually has all the information of how everything works, and now you have to scale that up as well. So that's the first part when you start scaling up. It is something to watch out for, to have some type of onboarding process and adding people, idea of how to add people in a sustainable way. That's number one. Number two is, well, I would say that the second thing is that you're going to experience some growth ache, because you're probably not going to be able to work as fast as you want, depending on the size of the project that you have. In the beginning, nobody really knows what's going to be the next thing, and it's really important for you to have people who can move across multiple areas, because you don't really know what the next thing is going to be. And a very classic one is that some people hire people who are very good at something, and they invest a lot of effort, a lot of money, etc., etc. But then it turns out that the customers want to go in a different direction, or you need to do something in a different way, and now you have to respond, because you have a lot of responsive behavior in the early days. You don't have this stable product that just that can be developed with a very predictive fashion. So what you actually need are people who can sort of improvise and think on the fly, and that is a talent that not that many people have, my friend. You are not going to be able to just mass hire people who are like super good at just going, oh, okay, shit, this unforeseen thing just happened. Well, I sort of know how to figure this out, and then they just sort of respond to the whole thing. A lot of people find it very difficult to improvise or to think think on the fly, and that is very important, because in the beginning, especially if you're one of the founders or something like that, you might find yourself having to sit on any share, like do anything that is necessary at the moment, and you sort of need more people who are like that. And the way I suppose we could call them are generalists, like people who have a broad skill set and sort of a very and are good at improvising, if that makes sense. Because in many cases you might find that, well, oh shit, right now we need more focus on, say, let's take something simple like backend. Well, we only have JavaScript developers, and you go, yeah, but the customer needs this really important deliverable because otherwise they're going to go to somebody else. Well, then you're going to have to roll up your sleeves and go and do backend work, because the company's going to go under if you don't do it, or some other situation like that. So you can't really afford in the beginning to hire bad people, because any scale up has, at the end of the day, it usually comes down to the people that you hire, right? And then you have other growth X, which is, well, the main the third one would be things like cost management, bugs and legacy management, things like that. Like technical debt is a big one as well, where you will find that you need to ship more often, you have more people shipping code, and your process is sort of unrefined, so you're going to be forced to start slowing the process down. And in many cases, these smaller startups, guys, they are not filled with experienced master level software developers. They're filled with 20 years, 30 years something, who usually don't have a really great understanding of how to do a lot of things. I mean, the right senior software developer is like a godsend to a startup, because most of them have very unrefined processes, and it very much shows in the quality of output to time to delivery ratio, where you really struggle in many cases to find a way to to set up your technical infrastructure so you have all the things you need for a qualitative deployment process, like logging, for example, or being able to manage your infrastructure without like the costs shooting through the roof or things like that. And then setting up a work process, like a lean process or not, depending on what you're doing, right? A work process that works, where you sort of like the product owners feel like they know how the development is going, the designers are involved, the developers feel like, yeah, I know how to release things, I know how to deal with production issues, creating playbooks, like all of this sort of administrative stuff is very, very difficult in the beginning, because everybody's sort of focused on just delivering, but nobody's really, like, you sort of, from the chaos, you sort of develop these odd bird ways of delivering software and making things work. And this is then you get to a point where you sort of organically find that this isn't working anymore. Like, you have too many bugs, or people are feeling too much frustration from the way of the things are being developed. Like, you have product owners who just sort of write shitty descriptions for stories, or you have software developers who just like roguishly develop things and then throw them out into production, and it breaks, and so forth and so forth. But at the same time, you don't want to slow down your process all too much, because you want to keep that competitive edge and be able to ship quickly and so forth. So you're sort of struggling to find this balance between quality and delivery speed, and you do that for quite some time until you mature not just your development process, but primarily your business model. Because in the beginning, when you're sort of hunting for customers and trying to address new feature requirements and sort of prove that you can develop very quickly and respond to customer need quickly, it's really hard to slow things down and take your time and do things in a qualitative fashion, because the market does not really allow for that sort of way of working, even though that is the preferred way for a lot of companies to work. You want usually to take things a little bit slower so you can really focus on quality and so forth. But it's very difficult to do that in a startup when you're sort of scaling up the whole thing. So what I want you to take away from this is that some growing pains from startups is usually number one, that you now you're trying to move a process of delivering software from maybe one person or a few people to more people, which is difficult because it might be that you have to train people. You might have to sort of not focus just on delivering, and if depending on your situation, that might be very difficult to give someone else that time. But you have to a certain degree, you have to focus on onboarding people, focusing on getting hiring people, etc., etc., which takes time away from the thing you want to be doing, which is ship company value, make money, all of this sort of stuff, right? That is the first growing pain, and you will find that that is actually more difficult. I mean, if we're just talking growing pains for the founders or the people running the show, you will have little sleep for a long time. Well, not always, but everything that is not in somebody else's job is your job when you run a startup. I can promise you that much. And that brings us to the second thing, is to find the sort of people who can sort of adapt to the very chaotic environment. You can't really scale with the wrong person, which is where it gets really dangerous. You in the early stages, the right people are very, very critical. You need people who can improvise. You need people who can just sort of roll up their arms and say, hey, yeah, I'm not an expert in this thing, but it needs to be done, and I will go and do it. The can-do attitude, doers, not talkers. The talkers are useless usually for startups in the early days. They're very dangerous. You need people who can just go and fix the problem, as opposed to people who can sit and talk about the problem, or people who can just do one thing and never not anything else. The more you want to go for, you don't try to get experts in the early days unless there's a very specific problem. Try to focus on people who can actually do more general stuff. That's usually a very good bet, because you don't really know what tomorrow is going to bring in those early days. Third and lastly, controlling process and quality, and finding that balance between shipping fast and meeting expectations while still maintaining quality of the system, because as your company grows, customers are going to go from asking for new features to always complaining that everything is broken all the time. And that is a very difficult balancing act between, you want to ship as quick as possible, but it has to work, and you at the same time you need to manage the cost of your technical infrastructure and all of that good stuff. All of these sorts of things are it's just a few, but I think it's a fairly strong list to start off with. Look out for these things, and fixing them, well, whole different video, probably multiple videos. Have a great day.